Right, Union Jack. I'm not going to read this. Okay, what do we do? We're an onshore UK company, concentrates solely on conventional oil and gas. What we do is we look for low risk projects in the onshore, focus usually on drill ready prospects which can create value fairly quickly. We tried to create a balanced portfolio of production, development, appraisal and exploration. And the portfolio is designed to generate activity, near-term news flow and value drivers. The company is positioned to deliver growth in reserves and production and asset value. And we have a fairly strict financial and technical discipline. As I said, we focus entirely in the UK onshore, and our main area of activity is in the northeast of England, largely in Lincolnshire and now in East Yorkshire, as you're probably aware, with the West Newton well. This area is really an extension of the East Midlands oil province. I'll talk about Yorkshire in a minute, which is not entirely connected to this. We have 13 licensed interests, both production, development and exploration. They're all relatively low risk and relatively low cost. We try and pick operators that are competent and have low G&A. And our two main operators are Egdon and Rathlin, and both of them are performed excellently in the past and hopefully in the future. We're focused on progressing drill-ready projects and value creation. Our principal assets, really, which I'll talk about tonight, are the West Newton A1 gas discovery, and now the West Newton A2 well, which you see a recent press release on your seat, which will give you some information about it. It was an appraisal well drilled to appraise this well, which discovered gas in the Zechstein formation, which is Permian. And I'll give you a little bit more detail about that later. The next project we have is the Wressle oil field, which was drilled and discovered in 2014. And since then has been mired in activity with the planning authorities in North East Lincolnshire. But we're working our way towards solving that, and we have a planning application hearing in November of this year to see if we can get planning permission to develop that project. And the next project is the Biscathorpe prospect, which was drilled this year and strangely enough remains untested. The other things that we have, which provide us with a bit of cash flow, are the Fiskerton airfield and Keddington oil fields. Fiskerton produces about 20 to 25 barrels a day. Keddington produces around about the same, actually. And it's been in production for years, it's carrying on. And we actually believe it's got quite a bit more potential than the operator has actually exploited at the moment, and we'd like to see further drilling there in terms of development drilling. Okay, so a little bit more detail. West Newton was discovered gas in the Zechstein. The new well has sort of highlighted the fact that it's probably a significant gas and liquid development opportunity. There's an extended well test on the new well is expected to start in Q3 of this year. And from the CPR that was done for Connaught Rathlin, the best estimates of reserves are 186 BCF. Now, it's slightly different than that now because we think there is a liquid phase to the hydrocarbons, and clearly that will have to be changed and modified. It's very close to gas markets and infrastructure, and I'll show you a map in a little while. The Wressle discovery, as I mentioned before, we started off actually with 8.33% of this, and we've gradually pursued it to the point now where we have 27.5%. And we like it a lot. It's got a lot of potential. It's a single well project at the moment, 2.51 million barrels of oil and 2P and 2C reserves. It's an attractive development with initial production around about 500 barrels a day, and that will come from the Ashover Grit. These discoveries are basically within Carboniferous sandstones, whereas this is within the Zechstein. We have an appeal for extension of the planning, which was successful, and now we have a development application which is going to go before the planning inspector in November of this year, and we expect a decision from that maybe within 2 or 3 months after he's heard the case, which should last about maybe 5 or 6 days. Biscathorpe, we drilled a well earlier on this year, down to about 2,050 metres, I think it was. The well has been suspended for a possible future sidetrack. The prospect, actually, the model for the prospect remains untested, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. At the moment, we're doing seismic reprocessing, and we ourselves are doing some geochemistry on the samples and the gas shows that we got within the well. A little bit more about West Newton. This is the licence area, Pedal 183. This is the Humber, just north of the Humber. It was a bigger licence actually, but Rathlin relinquished the areas which really weren't of any great interest, and this is a city of Hull in here. They mapped this originally on 2D seismic, and the area of this licence, just as a matter of interest, is 176,000 acres. So it's a pretty big licence for the UK. If you think of these things as 10 by 10 kilometre blocks, this is a sizable licence. They drilled the A1 well, found gas, and they got a kick on it and had to kill it, and they decided they would go back and have another look at it. But the encouragement that they got from drilling this well, which, as I said, was drilled on 2D, was they then shot 3D over the entire feature. And that's resulted in where we are today, where they developed the DA2 project and drilled it and successfully. And I can't really tell you a great deal about that because there isn't a great deal to tell you at the moment. We've got a well that was drilled, it's logged, it's cored in the ZEX time. We have indications of gas and potentially liquids, and these remain to be tested, and that's really the next step before we make any reasonable estimates in terms of numbers of reserves. It's not going to be possible to do that until we have some better information back from the reservoir in terms of pressures, and also when we integrate the results of the second well into the seismic model to see how it changes that. The encouraging thing is that if this does in fact work and bears out what we want to do, there are 2 other projects. There's a Spring Hills area down here, which I think there's 3 lines of 2D across that east-west, and they look almost identical to what we see across this project. There's another project to the northwest, which is called the Ellaby Prospect, and that's also defined on 2D, but probably less so than the one to the south. And the plan is basically, if we get a good result from this well in the end, these will have 3D acquired over them, because you really can't drill those things without 3D seismic. I guess that's about it. This is when the well was drilling. You can see it's a fairly rural place, nice site, close to a road, and close to protesters, sadly, but there you go. And just to summarise it, it looks to be a substantial hydrocarbon accumulation. There's a 65-metre interval. No water seems to have been detected. And with it encountered again within the Kirkham area, which is the primary target. There seems to be a significant liquids component, but that is yet to be proven. We planned this extended well test for Q3 2019, so not that far away. If it is as big as people would like to believe, then it's potentially a transformational well result for Union Jack. We've got a reasonable interest, and obviously if we get any more, we'd take it, but the chances of that are fairly unlikely, I think. Yeah, the MPV is expected to significantly increase following the interpretation. Really what we need to do is integrate the well results from the A2 well and any test information and pressure information, again, as I said before. And as I pointed out to you earlier on, there's further potential for projects within this really rather large licence. And most of it doesn't have any 3D over it at all. There are only 2 3Ds. One is over the West Newton project, and the other 3D was over a project to the west, which was Crawberry Hill, and they drilled that, and in fact it doesn't appear to have been on a structure, which is a bit sad, never mind. What it does have going for it is it's very close to infrastructure. As you can see here, this map shows the West Newton project. This is the Aldborough gas storage project. This is a national grid compression station. We have this Saltend chemical complex with about, I think it's about 9 companies there that, you know, use the kind of product that they might get from these wells. So it's ideally situated to be exploited, you know, fairly quickly, frankly. The next step, which everybody, of course, always asks, is, as I said to you, is to shoot 3D over these 2 prospects. But also, these 2 wells are not that far apart. I mean, they're only about, I think at the Zechstein level, they're about 400 metres apart, which is not a great deal of distance. So really what they need to do is start to step out a little bit further away from these and get a little bit braver and do something else. And to the south of this, they have a lease on a well site, which has got planning permission. It's all ready to go, and that's the B1 location. And that's about 2 kilometres to the south. So that would be a useful well to drill next. Whether they do that, I don't know. We haven't had discussions with them yet. The other thing about the B1 well is it's in a much better position to test the lower interval, the KB, which is the Z1 in the Zechstein, which you'll all know, having probably read all sorts of things on the press releases, has potential for oil. The very first well that they drilled had oil staining in the KB, but it wasn't a reef well, it was actually a back reef well. So they'll need to carefully consider how they drill the B1 well to sort of take advantage of that. And as I mentioned, there's 2 natural gas terminals, Dimlington and Easington as well, and for the National Grid there's oil refineries at Lidsey, and the Tetney terminal, pipelines over the feature itself, 2 or 3 power station, Killinghome and Immingham, Saltend power station. So there's all sorts of places that we can go to develop if we get a developable project to sell the product. And really, this is just summing it up again. It's got compelling economic value, really, in terms of what is there. I mean, the operator's evaluation is a NPV of 10% is 300 million. And contingent resources could have a significant financial impact on the current NPV if the liquids are there. We have 16.65. We're very happy with it. As I said, we'd like more. And we were very happy with the results of the A2 well. And it has to be said that Rathlin are an extremely good and technically highly competent operator. And as I pointed out, additional upside in the rather large licence area. Now the Wressle oil discovery, which I mentioned earlier on, is to the south of the Humber again. This is in Carboniferous sandstones. You can see this is the area of the field. To the north of it is the Broughton North prospect, and we have a 27.5% interest in both of these. This field here is Crosby Warren, and it's produced from the Ashover Grit, which is the formation that we're actually trying to complete if we get planning permission. And that's produced for 27 years from that. So trying to guess how long this thing is going to produce is kind of a bit of a guessing game, to be honest. And you can see that there's a series of other prospects down there's a large fault that runs through here. There's a series of other projects that run down the side. This is actually the North Kelsey prospect. So it's an interesting area. It's a simple, relatively simple feature. It's covered with 3D. It's a faulted anticline. This project, the Broughton prospect, is actually separated across in this direction by a fault, and it's actually structurally higher than the Wressle anticline to the south. This is a composite log and CPI log from the Wressle well, from the Wressle well, and there are several reservoirs in here, but the main ones are the Penistone flags, which you can see here. There's a gas cap in the Penistone flags and an oil leg. And then there's the Wingfield flags, which is down here. And then the Ashover Grit, which is the one that we're trying to complete as the first phase of the development. And this could, if we get permission to do this is potentially going to carry on for a long time. all of these intervals were tested at the time the well was drilled, and you can see the results here. I won't bother to read them out. But the interesting thing is none of them recovered water of any description. They recovered kilbrine, and then that decreased, and they all recovered clean oil and gas. The interesting thing is as well is there are other intervals you can see here in the green, which have not actually formed part of the completion or the testing program. But they're all behind pipe, and sooner or later they could be exploited as well. There's 14.18 million barrels in place across 3 reservoirs, the Ashover, the Wingfield and the Penistone flags. 2.15 million barrels, 2P reserves of 0.62 and 0.2 BCF. The initial development was based on the 2P reserves only, and to include the, if we want to include the Penistone flags reserves into that, we have to go to a proper development plan which needs to be accepted and approved by the OGA. But at the moment the plan is basically just to complete the Ashover grit and flow that, which we expect to flow reasonably well. We think, as I mentioned, there's substantial upside in the Penistone. There's actually upside in those other horizons behind the pipe that I mentioned to you. And frankly, I'm kind of surprised in a way that they weren't tested in the original well, but I guess that's the way it will. It's all down to cost at the end of the day, I think. The Penistone flags, as you saw in that log, is actually the thickest zone, and it's probably the most material and laterally extensive. It does produce oil. It did test, not produce, but it did test oil in the Broughton B1 well, which I showed you, which is actually on that feature, which was, I said, was up 40. It flowed 40 barrels a day from that in 1984 in a well drilled by BP. Now, we drilled Biscathorpe earlier on, and there was something of it's an interesting project. What it basically is that if you look at the regional maps, Biscathorpe is the highest point along something called the East Barcliff Ridge, which has migration of oil and gas from the Humber Basin to the north and gas from the Southern Gas Basin offshore. And the idea is that there's several wells which demonstrated easily at Saltfleetby and at Keddington, where these basal sands within the Carboniferous have oil or gas in them, and that's migrated from those two source areas I just mentioned. It turns out that when BP drilled the first well, the Biscathorpe 1 well, they found about 1.2 meters of sand with oil in it. They didn't test it because BP never would test a thing like that, but we did a lot of analysis on it, and it showed it had C5 gas in it. It shows basically that there's liquid hydrocarbons there, and our model was that in fact that as you come off the crest of this high, the sands thicken down flank of the high. And the idea of drilling the well was to find a spot where the seismic says you can expect to see thickening and drill the well. And we did that, and sadly that isn't what worked out. And we've now worked out what the problem was, is that the well location for the B2 well was in the valley of the River Bain. And the surface deposits of that river have led to an anomaly, which is an LVL anomaly, which is low velocity and high amplitude. And basically what it's done is it depressed the reflection on the Dinantian surface, which is what we were mapping, so that when we drilled the well, the Dinantian pick sort of came in up here, and the seismic said it should have been down here. And actually what we're doing now is we're trying to, or we are going to, in fact, reprocess the seismic to take out that effect, remap the area, and then we'll see where we can sidetrack to get down the flank of this high. The second well is actually 1.8 meters higher than the first well, which is a bit bizarre. But we've done a fair bit of work on it. One of the interesting things about it is that when we drilled into the Dinantian surface, we encountered quite a high gas reading, quite a lot of high gas readings. And we carried on drilling through this carbonate, which is not really that good a reservoir in the UK, and very often doesn't contain very much at all. But we drilled down and we ended up with about 500 feet of gas shows. And I admit, relatively poor porosity according to the logs that we calculated. But we never ever got out of the gas shows. And in fact, as we got to the bottom of the wells, there were places where they increased, which was really sort of quite bizarre. So what it suggests is that this regionally high hill that you've got at Biscathorpe is flanked around it by something that's leaking hydrocarbons into a porous, relatively porous zone within the Denantian limestone. And that's really the model that we're pursuing. We're actually doing two things as Union Jack. The seismic reprocessing is being done by the joint venture group as a whole, but we have undertaken to do our own geochemistry, because what we wanted to do was to take the chip samples from across the Denantian and see what we can extract from them, not us, but APT, the geochemistry people up in Conway, to see if it gives us any indication of what these hydrocarbons are. And the gas readings and the gas shows in the well, that we had them analyse that as well, and they actually point out that it looks like a liquid phase in the Denantian. So it has some sort of slight comparisons to, I guess, to what we found out at West Newton, but it is quite thick, and it's probably worth following up. So we're, as I say, we're trying at the moment to see where we can go in terms of a sidetrack location, and we have the lease on that and for another 2 years, and we could easily sidetrack 2 kilometres from that. This was the Biscathorpe well when it drilled. It's sort of pretty picture time, but this was drilled by the same rig actually that drilled the Rathlin well. In fact, it moved from this location to the Rathlin location. So it's, in summary then, we've low risk onshore strategy, focused on drill ready projects, value creation. We have a balanced portfolio. We look at production. We constantly look for ways of buying into more production. We're always interested in we look at deals for exploration and basically appraisal and also production. It's the only way that we're going to grow this company. The portfolio is a very active portfolio, as you've seen. It generates near-term news flow, so we've got some good value drivers. The successful West Newton appraisal well has been very pleasing to everybody who's been involved in the project. It's a slightly unexpected result, has to be said, but in terms of the liquid content, and the extended well test, is poised to deliver a major onshore development in the UK. The Biscathorpe prospect remains untested, but we're still working on that. It's covered with 3D, and it gives us the best opportunity of maybe finding a better spot to drill the well. The Wressle discovery, as I mentioned to you, is just really waiting for a council to make up its mind that they'd like to let us develop it. We've addressed all the issues that they raised in their various objections before, which actually weren't related to anything we were doing down the hole. They were related to surface water conditions, and we've spent a lot of time and a lot of money, rather the operator and the joint venture have, to address those issues, and we hope that in November that we get the right result. So we're positioned to deliver growth in reserves, production and asset value. And I think that's it, and thank you for your attention.